Pooja Puri has loved writing stories since she was a child. She first tasted publishing success with her short story Chess while still a student, and her 2017 debut novel The Jungle was nominated for the 2018 Philip Carnegie Medal. Her latest title, A Dinosaur Ate My Sister, is a fun time-travelling adventure story and is the first book to be selected for the Marcus Rashford Book Club. Nikki Gamble recently talked to Pooja and asked her to tell us more about her writing journey.
I knew I wanted to be an author since I was a child. So when I got asked that question, what do you want to be when you're older? My answer always was, I want to be a writer. And it's funny, actually, because I think early on, everyone thinks, that's wonderful. And as you get older and you still keep having this as an answer, people start to kind of give you a bit of a worried look. That's fine now because I am actually now an author. But I remember going into libraries when I was younger and looking at all the books on the shelves and seeing the authors' names and just thinking, this must be the most brilliant job in the world, that you just get to write stories for a living. And like many writers, I went through the cycle of writing stories and rejections and writing and rejections. And then in 2014, I was one of 10 winners selected for this Ideas Tap Inspires competition, which was a competition run by an organisation in Norwich called Writers Centre Norwich. And it's a brilliant organisation which it carries out a lot of different writing schemes and mentoring schemes to help encourage up-and-coming authors. And what this scheme did was it partnered a new author with an established one. So I was partnered with Nicola Upson, who's a Faber published crime author. And through this process, we had one-to-one sort of tailored sessions, really, which helped develop our writing and hone our writing skills. And I found it really helpful to have this supportive network to help build my knowledge of the publishing process and really get an insight into the industry, because I think until you're actually kind of thrown into it, you don't really know about the inner workings and who the agents are and who the editors are and how it all links together. It can be quite an unfamiliar world. And then there was a showcase, I remember, at the end of this scheme, and a number of different agents and editors were invited. And it was really useful for me because it was through that I managed to get an agent. And from that, I then went on to do the Writing for Young People MA at Bath Spa University too. So it's been quite a journey, really, to see how the stories have developed from that first draft to now a real book on a real bookshelf.
It's interesting listening to you talk that you appreciated as much the industry knowledge as you did the creative.
Yeah, it was talked about a lot, even on the master's course as well, because in fact, there's actually a whole module on it, because I think people who might be new to the process may just think you kind of submit your story and that's it, you're done with it, until it appears in its sort of beautiful form on a shelf. But that's not true at all. You're very, very involved with the process. There's a number of different editorial stages that are involved in transforming the book from the first draft into the finished book that you see. And actually, there's a lot of marketing and sort of knowledge that is actually really useful to know, and sort of how to promote yourself as an author, how to get involved with events, and really to put yourself out there, sort of to give your book and your story the best sort of exposure is actually another really important strand of the course that we talked about and discussed as well.
Did you have to have a thick skin?
Yes, you do, in a word, particularly on the master's course, because it's actually even harder because you're writing every single week and you're writing a couple of different pieces, and obviously under those tight time constraints, what you're going to bring to the workshop won't necessarily be your best, most polished work. And so you do have to have a very thick skin, because when it goes into there, it's going to get dissected, and it's all done very constructively, but you can't be too precious about certain sentences or certain ideas. You have to be open to people trying to help you improve your story.
This book that we're talking about now, it's not your first book, but it's your first what is now called middle grade book, and it has been selected for the Marcus Rashford Reading Club. It's the first book that's been selected for that reading club.
Yeah, the book club. It's this brilliant initiative which is designed to improve access to books and reading for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. And the book club has teamed up with the children's food charity Magic Breakfast, and what they're going to be doing is donating 50,000 free copies of the book to over 850 primary schools across England and Scotland. And essentially the aim is to try and give children who might not otherwise have access to books and access to stories, to give them that access and to give them the opportunity to experience that wonder and that joy of books for themselves. And I'm really excited about it because growing up, I was fortunate because I did have access to books. And I think often people sometimes think a book's a book, but I always say a book is never just a book. A book is a lot more than that, as well as, allowing you to sort of lose yourself in someone else's imagination and someone else's world. They help build, I think, a lot of transferable skills too, like resilience and ability to empathize with others. And I think all of these things, that wonder and that empowerment that books can give it's something that should be available to everyone. And I'm really excited to see what the book club does and what it can achieve. So yeah, I can't wait. I'm really excited for the book to come out and see what happens.
That's a really important message that you've just given there. A book is never just a book. And you've talked about the sort of life lessons that reading can teach you. You don't necessarily think you're being taught at the time, but those lessons kind of sit within you. And then when you experience perhaps particular challenges in your life, all that repository of reading is there, and you draw upon it. I mean, I've been very aware of doing that throughout my life. Is that something that you've also been aware of, consciously drawing on things that you've read?
I think so. And I think because with stories, that what obstacles characters will encounter, they'll probably fall and then they'll rise and they'll get up and try again. And I think that sort of determination and perseverance is actually really key to so many children's stories. And I think experiencing stories and knowing that actually you can carry on, it's really important, not just for being a writer, but just in life in general.
Definitely. Which means that we should turn our attention to your hilarious book, Dinosaur Ate My Sister, which is full of characters that learn some of these lessons about getting up and having another go and being resilient. Perhaps just introduce us to the story first.
Okay, so A Dinosaur Ate My Sister is this very wacky time travel adventure which features Esha Verma, a genius inventor extraordinaire, her apprentice Broccoli, and his tortoise Archibald. And the story kicks off with Esha wanting to win the Brain Trophy, which is this amazing prize which is given every year to the best young inventor. And she's been desperate to win it. And for the past 3 years, she's come second place. And this year, she's completely determined that she's going to win it. In fact, she's convinced, because this year she's come up with her most genius invention yet, which is a time machine. And everything seems to be going really well until a day before the contest. As they're getting ready to test the time machine, her big sister Nishi, as big sisters are prone to do, storms into her room, and she presses the big red button, which she is specifically told not to touch. And lo and behold, she disappears along with Esha's time machine. And I don't want to give too much more away about what happens next, but what I will say is that it involves Secundus Secundi, a new officer of time, who then appears and informs them that they have broken time regulations as decreed by the Office of Time. And what follows after that is this very sort of bonkers madcap adventure come prehistoric rescue mission, which involves inventions and terrifying time-space monsters, and of course plenty of dinosaurs as well.
I'm glad you used the word bonkers. It is bonkers. It's gloriously bonkers. And Esha as a protagonist certainly doesn't lack confidence. That's not one of her problems, is it?
No, not at all. She is confident, perhaps to a fault, I would say. The best thing is she doesn't even realise sometimes that she's so confident that often that's also what gets her into trouble. But it's funny, actually, you mentioned her confidence, because often with coming up with character voices, sometimes it can be a little bit of a battle to try and figure out what is the voice of this character going to be. And you can often go through quite a few drafts, but actually with Esha, her voice just came to me immediately. It was so confident and so full of this very brazen self-belief that I'm a genius inventor and I'm going to prove it to you. That's her sort of attitude towards life, really.
I mean, she loves inventing things that are technological, but she also loves inventing language. Yeah. And tell us about some of her invented words. She's like Shakespeare in that respect. I mean, he was very good at coming up with new words too.
Yeah, it's funny because I think for me, I've never seen sort of science and reading or English, if you like, as being sort of exclusive. I've always seen them as being they sort of intermingle, really. And I kind of think that the process of, writing and coming up with words is very similar to inventing something technological, because what you're doing is you have, say, an idea or something that you start off with, and then you build at it and you tinker away at it. And then you sort of have a finished product and you sort of see what happens with it. And it just seemed to me the most natural thing that if she was inventing sort of these scientific sort of bonkers inventions, that she would, of course, always also invent words, because that's kind of her whole mindset and her whole approach to life is she sees something and she thinks, oh, I can make this better. And this is how I'm going to make it better, is give my own twist on it. So one of my favorite words that she embeds in the book is drong, which is what she calls her big sister Nishi, which is essentially a way of saying that she's double wrong. So she's a drong. And spingly tingly is another one that she uses a lot, which is taken, I think, really from spine tingly, and she sort of merges them together. And so, yeah, there's quite a few different ones in there. And of course, her inventions as well all have these quite interesting names, like the extender hand is one of them, and the Insta-D sticker. So I wanted to kind of give it some sort of modern spins, but yeah, just make it quite fun.
Of course, once those words are out there, they're there forever. It'll be interesting to see how the readers pick them up and whether drong becomes part of the lingo.
I hope it does. That's the aim.
Right at the beginning of the book, you name check some inventors. You're talking about it's fictional, where you're talking about that they won this prize when they were 8 and 10 years old, and there's some names we recognise there, like Alexandra Graham Bell, and there are a couple of women inventors that you mention, Nancy Johnson and Grace Hopper, who are perhaps not such familiar names. Do you think that sometimes female inventors in the past have not risen into the limelight in quite the same way?
I should probably start with what Nancy invented first. So she was the inventor of the first ice cream machine. And I think it's interesting. I would say it's maybe not even just women inventors. I would say it's probably also women in science too. And I think I was really conscious when I started writing this that, yes, Esha was going to be a genius inventor, but she was also going to be a woman of science, as is Nishi, her big sister, because she's a meteorologist. And both of them are very confident scientists, and they don't think that they can't do science. They don't think of it as being a sort of a boys' subject. And that's definitely something that sort of fed into, I think, from my own experiences at school, because I loved science as a kid too. And it would be nice if female inventors were given a little bit more exposure, I think, than they are. And that's something I'm sort of hoping to change a little bit with the book, is actually to give kids a bit of a sort of a way in, that they can kind of go and look up these inventors for themselves and think, oh, well, actually, what is it that they did? And, what do they do? And just to find out a little bit more about their lives. I just knew that I wanted Esha to have some female role models, particularly inventors. That felt really important to me as I was writing it. And I did also really want her sister to also be into science, but into a completely different strand of science, one which Esha just thinks is the most boring thing ever, because I just thought that would give it a really fun dynamic for the reader.
And of course, Broccoli's into science as well, but he's more into dinosaurs because of his kind of heritage and his grandmother, who was a great fossil hunter. And I love the way that, I mean, sometimes when I was reading it, I didn't know whether I was reading something that you'd invented or something that was real, because it is in this madcap story. But you kind of interweave little bits of information, again, without them detracting from this adventure that's going on. But the idea that birds didn't come from pterodactyls, for instance. That's a really interesting one.
Yes, and that's actually true. I think it was great because through Broccoli, I did this with Esha too, but particularly through Broccoli, what I actually did was sort of try and feed the reader facts about sort of dinosaurs and the dinosaur world without them realizing that they're kind of being taught about it. And I think it would be, I would love it if after this, someone who has no idea about dinosaurs can actually just sort of recite off a couple of facts about them.
So the great thing is that Esha's time machine does work. I mean, it's fantastic. Yes, it and of course, we can guess that it goes back to the age of the dinosaurs, the Cretaceous period in particular. And that brings us into contact with a third character. They're a sort of little trio that go off on this adventure together. But tell us about Secundus.
So he is a new officer of time, and he always follows the rule book, and he's very sort of determined to be like his father, who's a time legend, and he's done so many amazing missions, and this is Secundus's first mission, and he really wants it to go well. He really wants to make his father proud, and unfortunately, what he doesn't realize is that his first mission is going to involve encountering Esha and her inventions and Broccoli and his tortoise. So I wanted someone who could kind of prove a sort of counter to Esha, but it was in such a way that she wasn't entirely sure how to deal with it, because he's very much about following the rules. So he's not sort of overtly antagonistic towards her, but at the same time, everything that he sort of does represents everything she sort of doesn't really believe in, because she doesn't really believe in going by the rules. She likes sort of taking risks and being quite adventurous, and he's very much about doing things properly and following the guidelines and following protocols. And what I really wanted was for both of them, when they sort of meet and their sort of worlds collide, is for both of them to learn something from each other and just to take away, a little bit of sort of each other's character almost, so that I think they have done that by the end. I think both of them have taken something positive from each other's character, and sort of they'll use that then to, in later life.
There's a little bit in there where they've got competing views as to what constitutes brilliance, which kind of exemplifies what you're talking about here. Now, you've obviously got a very creative brain and inventive brain too. And there are lots of things in there. I mean, I love the little tocs that are caught, and that's to do with the time energy that's created by the shift in time. And then all these little tocs come to feed on the time energy that's left behind by the time machine. And they're sort of like firefly creatures, aren't they, that can be captured into glass vials. Brilliant idea. And then we've all heard, or most people will have heard, of the kind of butterfly effect that, if you change one tiny thing, it can have these ripples through time. And that's one of the ideas behind the time machine going back. Well, suddenly things might change. That's possibly quite a serious philosophical idea, but then you have this amazing machine that measures the ripple effect. So it's just absolutely hilarious. So tell us a bit about that.
That was a lot of fun, and because time travel is such a massive concept, and there's so many different strands to it. You've got the grandfather paradox, you've got the butterfly effect, there's time-space continuum, there's so many different, you've got parallel worlds. You can probably tell that I'm a big fan of Doctor Who and time travel. And so I think all of this sort of fed into the story. And I remember when my editor, sort of that first draft, she said, okay, we need to strip back some stuff here. There's a lot going on. And at the same time as obviously writing a time travel story, you also want to make sure it's accessible to the reader, because there's a lot going on in this story. And so essentially what I ended up doing was looking at it and looking at all this kind of bonkers time travel stuff that was going on and thinking, okay, I need to pick my favorite one out of all of this. And I picked the ripple meter, because what I like doing when I'm sort of building fantasy worlds is I like sort of taking existing familiar ideas and then turning them on their head, because it's like it's something the reader will know about, but then they'll sort of be reading and they'll think, oh, hang on, this isn't quite doing, or it's slightly different to what I was expecting. because it sort of gives them this sort of comfort level and then it takes them out of it. And I think that's a great thing to do to a reader as a writer. I remember sitting down, and when I was actually, I drew out this ripple meter because I was trying to figure out sort of physically what it would look like on the page. And then I remember sort of playing around with what is the worst that could happen with these ripples, and sort of each one, it sort of notches up the urgency and the sort of danger. And that was really a writer's dream, was to just go completely mad with that and just think, you pick an era, in time, and you think, okay, how am I going to invert this? And how am I going to make it a little bit bonkers and a little bit mad? And that was really how I approached the sort of the building the time world, really.
So what's interesting is in that meter, at one end of the continuum, you've got calm, and at the other end, at the extreme, you've got doom, and then there are all these crazy things that happen, and then the last one that you get to before doom is the world turns upside down. Well, if you think about that logically, it isn't any way up anyway.
Yeah, some of it, if you think about it, there is actually, you'd sort of think, oh well, hang on a second, but it's sort of the pace at which the story runs. I did put in very slight, I think maybe more so for adults if they're reading this with their with the children, just little things they might pick up on to also give them a bit of a laugh, which the kids may not necessarily pick up on this, but I think the best sort of funny books are those which can appeal across the ages. And so I was always conscious, let me see if I can feed something in here that might sort of get the adults as well.
You've mentioned that you're a Doctor Who fan. I'm assuming that you also like things like The Land That Time Forgot and Jurassic Park and all Jurassic of those Park, sorts of things. Jurassic Park, you're nodding at me furiously here.
I've loved Jurassic Park ever since the first time I watched it. And it's one of those movies that, if you walk past the TV and it happens to be on, I'll just always end up sitting down and watching it, even though I've watched it so many times. And I think it's just the fact that you've got these, you've got humans coming into contact with these prehistoric creatures who are obviously not prehistoric anymore. They brought them back. And it's sort of that initial, they think, oh, everything's fine. And then it's very, very quickly not fine. And they're thrown into a lot of danger. And I was trying to capture, I think, a slight flavour of that with when Esha and Broccoli land in the Cretaceous age, because they start off with the dinosaur who's just happily chewing away on those leaves. And then actually, suddenly things start to go pear-shaped very, very quickly. Because I think in Jurassic Park, although you've got the kids, they are sort of supervised sort of in terms of with the adults. And I just wanted this to be an encounter just with children and dinosaurs. And I just think that, especially because Esha is such a confident character, she's sort of the character that would think, well, they're not going to get the better of me. And so I just thought that would be a really funny kind of dynamic to have, because here you've got the most dangerous sort of creature that's probably ever existed, and here you've got Esha who thinks that nothing can defeat her, and sort of it's like, who's going to come out on top in that situation?
We're not going to tell anyone.
No, we're not. You'll have to read it to find out.
I think we've probably done enough to whet people's appetites.
I hope so.
What is going to happen in the Cretaceous period, and whether they do ever get back to Esha's laboratory, and whether she does ever enter her time machine for the Young Inventors competition. Who knows? People will have to read it and find out. But it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, Pooja. I wish you all the very best with this new book, and maybe there'll be another adventure for us to look forward to from this trio in the future.
There is, there will be a book 2, which I'm working on at the moment, and that will hopefully be coming out next year.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Nikki. Thank you for having me.
In the Reading Corner is presented by Nikki Gamble and produced by Alison Hughes. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please do leave a review for us. To find out about other projects, including an audience with events and the Exploring Children's Literature Summer School, visit www.exploringchildrensliterature.uk. Join us again soon in the Reading Corner on your favourite podcast platform.